Do you see this body of water? The Arabian plate, which is connected to the African plate, finally collided with the Eurasian plate. And when this took place, the Zagros Mountains were created in Iran, and also the Persian Gulf was created. But at this time, it's not a gulf, but actually a basin. After the last ice age ended, and the ice starts to melt, which rises sea levels, the Gulf of Oman's water starts dumping into the Persian Gulf basin. History shows, or there is a theory that says, when the Homo erectus finally left Africa, one of the main civilizations was around the Persian Gulf, but they are no longer around since they were flooded when the sea levels rose. Historians believe that the Persian Gulf is one of the newest seas in the world. Do you see this map? This is the research that was done in the University of Santa Barbara, and it predicts that the Persian Gulf is only 6,000 years old. This study shows that about 15,000 years ago, the Persian Gulf was actually very lush and green with a huge river passing through it. It would pass the Strait of Hormuz and get dumped in the Gulf of Oman. The river that was passing inside the Persian Gulf was massive because a bunch of massive rivers were dumping into that, like the Tigris and the Euphrates. But just like we said, about 11,000 years ago, the sea levels started to rise, and with the help of those vast rivers, this basin got filled up with water and it created a brand new gulf. You might not know this, but the Persian Gulf that was formed in the beginning was much larger, and a lot of places were underwater, like Kuwait, the south of Iraq, parts of Iran by the Zagros Mountains. They were all filled up with water. It has not been too long that the Persian Gulf has actually shrunk in size, where you have Kuwait, south of Iran, and south of Iraq. When the Achaemenid Empire, about 500 BC, was around, the Persian Gulf was actually in its full size, much longer. The reason the Persian Gulf got smaller is because the earth got colder. A lot of seawater began to froze, and this caused the sea levels to begin to decline and go lower and lower. The Persian Gulf began to shrink, and we have today's size. So this means because of global warming, if the sea levels begin to rise, then the Persian Gulf is going to get much larger. But no one can actually predict. A lot of people say the world is getting hotter. It feels like it's getting hotter, but the sea levels have not changed whatsoever. But either way, this is the Persian Gulf we all know and love today. It was around this area that the first civilizations were born. And just like we said, the ancient people, or should I say primates like Homo erectus, began living here when they finally left Africa. But we only know the ones that were outside, like the Sumerians, the Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, the Iranians, and the Arabs. These civilizations have a lot of wars to control this entire area, but in terms of ancient history, they never actually gave the sea a name. The Assyrians were the first ones to get a taste of the sea, and they realized that it's bitter, and that is why they called it the Bitter Sea. And when you compare the water to the Tigris and the Euphrates, of course it's gonna taste terrible. It's also interesting to know that the Assyrians make another name more popular, Arab, and in their language, Arab basically means Westerners, and that's because the Arabs used to live on the west of the Assyrians. Either way, this place does not have a name until we get to the Achaemenid Persian Empire, when this sea is completely in the control of the Iranians. In the Persian Empire, you would always see the Persian Gulf name being used everywhere. And in the writings of Darius the Great that was left in the Suez Canal when he actually started it, he says he wanted to create this canal to connect the Persian Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. This name was stuck to this gulf, and they used it ever since. The Greeks would use Persikon Kopos from 300 BC, which literally translates to Persian Gulf. And after this, every civilization used this name for this part of the world. Let's take a look at all these maps in history. Ever since maps were created, the Persian Gulf name was always here. The Persian Gulf is 96,912 square miles, and it's 615 miles long. You might not notice, but after the Gulf of Mexico and the Hudson Bay, the Persian Gulf is the third largest gulf in the world. Throughout history, it was usually one important empire that lived alongside this gulf, the Iran Shah Persian Empire. But nowadays, you can find 8 countries around the Persian Gulf, which was all created by the British after World War I. But even with all that, the most amount of land next to the Persian Gulf is Iran. Let's go back in time a little bit to 1955, when Bahrain is now in the control of the British Empire instead of Iran. There is some British advisors in Bahrain that are trying to give Iran a bad name to the Bahrain government. One of those advisors was named Charles Belgrave, and he was always tell the emirs that, why do you guys call this the Persian Gulf? Why don't you call it the Arabian Gulf? This was the first form of cancer that was planted in the name of the Persian Gulf. But the Bahrainis didn't really pay attention. Then 5 years later, about the year 1960, a pan-Arabist movement led by Jamal Abdul Nasser, the president of Egypt, was very against Iran, and he would always tell the Arabs to use the name Arabian Gulf. And he was the reason the cancer cell began to grow with the name change. Rich Arabian countries tried with a lot of money to change the name of this gulf. They would pay different news networks, educational channels like the National Geographic and the Discovery Channel to use the name Arabian Gulf, but none of those were successful because the name stands strong to this day. When they realized that they can't change the name, they said, we will offer you money to not say Persian or Fars, just call it the Gulf. And a lot of them accepted the money and now call it the Gulf. One of those news networks is Reuters, one of the most famous news agencies in the world. And all of a sudden, they refer to the Persian Gulf as the Gulf. You probably already noticed, but the most amount of Rolls-Royce sold is in the Persian Gulf Arabian countries like the Emirates and the Saudi Arabia. For a company like Rolls-Royce, money is everything. And if you offer them money, they'll do anything for you. We don't know how much they received to do this, but they created a phantom dedicated to the quote-unquote Arabian Gulf. It is interesting to note that when they posted this on Instagram, Iranians from all over the world attacked it with comments. And all they were saying is that it's the Persian Gulf. The Rolls-Royce CEO didn't want to lose the money that the Arabs gave them, so they decided to do something else. They removed the Arabian name and they only called it the Gulf Phantom. Either way, you can do a lot of things with money, but something you can't do is change a historical name for a place. Before Jamal Abdul Nasser said the Arabian Gulf and threw the cancer everywhere, there was no problem with the name because you can find it in Saudi books before this took place, where they called the Persian Gulf Al-Khalij al-Farsi, which is the Arabian version of Persian Gulf. But this is the story of the Persian Gulf. We just wanted to make this video to raise awareness on what is happening. Let us know what you think.